You were born with individual strengths and a unique purpose. Don't let fears, false beliefs, or life's happenings diminish your influence. It's time to live and lead for impact. Host Kirsten Ross, expert of transformation, will help you defeat the drama and overcome the trauma that can stop you in your tracks. You'll gain focus, find confidence, and take bold action. Unleash passionate, purposeful you. Let's go.
Welcome to Live and Lead for Impact, part of the Impact Academy that I'll be talking about in a little bit. So thanks so much for joining me. I'm Kirsten Ross, your host, and this is episode 235. And today I have a great guest. I'm so lucky to always have great guests. His name is Sherman Tylawsky, and he is the CEO of the George Washington Institute, host of the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast, and a communications director. A graduate of King's College London and Texas A&M University, he is an aspiring statesman and George Washington enthusiast who plans to run for office in the future. Well, very unique guest today, so I'm looking forward to hearing more. Welcome, Sherman.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, for having me today.
Yeah, so let's dive right in and tell me what you are, the impact that you're hoping to make in the world.
Absolutely. Well, since I was little, I've always been fascinated with American history, in particular the stories of American history, in particular about the service that countless generations of Americans have made since the founding of our nation. And I've always wanted to bring that out, not just in my career, but to other people's lives as well. And currently, I do a lot of this. I tell fascinating stories from American history, from a lot of unknown figures in the past, and I try to bring out the lessons that we can learn from those individuals. Even though we're talking about two or more different times within the course of American history, it's a great lesson for people who want to get into public service, who may just want to listen to an amazing story about people who gave themselves for causes that were bigger than just themselves and their communities. I also do a lot of public speaking too about national security, which is my background in my graduate studies. So I comment on U.S.-China relations, perhaps counterterrorism and some other subjects. But most recently, I've also been talking about the importance of civility in our politics, which I believe is something that a lot of people yearn for, but is not often expressed or practiced throughout our political discourse. My experiences in public speaking really, I think, stem from my education, but also very much my work experiences too. I had the absolute privilege to be able to work for the House of Representatives as an intern for a Republican member and a Democrat member. And I believe that's a really big cornerstone on the impact I want to have, which is I want people to cultivate faith in the U.S. political system and the United States as a nation, because with everything that's going on right now, with a lot of problems going on, it's important to have that faith, not just in one person, but really in a whole system that hopefully can breed generations and generations of public service. And that's what we need right now in this country.
Wow. Well, those are lofty goals and an important impact. So, and I know we probably don't want to turn this into totally a political kind of thing.
Sure.
And certainly we're talking U.S. based politics versus, elsewhere in the world. But what is so let's just talk specifically, and really divisiveness, like that's not even really political. It's just kind of a fact right now.
Right.
There is such a divide. And I feel like, igniting fear and that divide is such a big part of, again, regardless of which side you're on or what your beliefs are, I think there are a cluster of people on both sides that really want to ignite fear and divide us.
Absolutely. And I think you touched upon something very important, which is that it's not political. And unfortunately, this divisiveness has seeped into aspects of society that we might not have expected would occur, whether it's in sports or entertainment or maybe at the family dinner. And I really wanted to address this part in my public speaking and in my career, because it really is important to have some kind of civility within our system. The ability to connect with people is not just through the political means, right? It's about understanding and learning about someone, about someone's life and what they do, what they're interested in. These are the kinds of things that we have to very much focus on, which is that human aspect, because we all have our thoughts and opinions, right? But when we channel those opinions in a more civil manner, we might be able to understand each other more. We might be able to find common ground that we might never have thought existed. And just these little things kind of really add up. And I really think, going back to what I was saying earlier about my experiences working for both sides of the aisle, I think it sends a message. I hope it sends a message to aspiring public servants, to people who are part of the political process to some degree. I hope that this will inspire those to search for someone who may not agree with everything that they believe in, and try to just develop a relationship and just get to know one another. That's kind of the kind of impact that I think could exist in small groups, within two people. It could happen to a whole community. But that's a really good starting point that we need to hopefully address in the near future.
So it's funny. So this whole topic, and as someone who, much of my work is really about helping people have, move through difficult conversations, whether there is now conflict or there's just been so much discomfort that the conversations haven't been had at all. I'm helping people prepare strategically for the conversations, create a mindset that helps them, bust through the fear, not let the fear stop them, and come and really communicate in a way, that active listening, like you're listening, true communication, active listening and speaking out, and trying to remove the filters that we can tend to put in the way of truly hearing others, etc. And always, I love that you're using that word common ground. That's my main thing. Like whether I'm working within a family business, there's a lot of common ground, but if we only focus on roadblocks or only focus on where we're different, that's what helps divide and ignite that fear. And so a few years ago, I actually was reaching out and trying to figure out how I could get involved as a resource to help people better. And the thing is too, the 100% focus right now is on where we are different or pointing fingers. Like, here's why this is exactly bad. And nothing that we do in this country or in the world is simple. It's not black and white. There's,
exactly.
Collateral damage or like unintended consequences, we can call it. No matter what decisions you make, there's nothing perfect that will give a 100% smooth path to that ultimate goal. But I feel like there's so much emphasis now in all the communication, again, from both sides, pointing out what's not right about whatever decisions have been made, and zero emphasis on here's what did work. Can we tweak from there? And so absent is all the creative problem solving that we really need. So I was not successful at all in finding a way where I could make an impact here. I found that I really ended up scaling back my, I when I talk about advocacy, I say like pick a level where you can make an impact. And I feel like at this point I'm down to, I can help make an impact, within some businesses and then personally by not using language that divides. But so I say all that to say, I would love to hear a little more specifically how through your speaking or the activities that you're engaging in that you hope to impact and decrease the amount of division and, what's the word you use? Like all the horrendous language that we hear and lack of respect.
Right. So, like civility or common ground. Right. Yeah. Yes.
What exactly is it that you plan to do? Maybe I'll jump on this bandwagon.
Please do. I mean, it really is all about building a platform for welcoming people on different sides of the aisle who may have different interests, but who, again, put themselves out there to serve for others in hopes of serving for a larger cause that's bigger than just themselves. And the things I usually do when it comes to public speaking, I love doing podcast interviews, obviously, including this one. But the main thing is to not only communicate a bit about my experiences on regards to working in government or in public service, but really also just speaking to others, learning about where they're coming from, and sometimes putting the heads together and coming up with policy solutions, or finding out ways where it can expand civics. Civics is such an important part of our democracy, and to be able to learn how to expand that through storytelling, because everyone loves a great story, right? So if we can expand civics and all the rest of the appreciation for that, that would be a really, really big step. If I can point maybe one experience that really in recent months has been quite an impact for me is I've had the opportunity to intern on the Hill in Capitol Hill in Washington D.C. this past spring, and on my third day of my internship, I was caught up in lockdown on January 6th, on the day of the insurrection. And that day was very momentous to me because it was a huge challenge just to you really even process what had happened on that day. And not to get too much in the politics here, I think overall though, what it has done is that it has only given me more motivation to do what I'm doing, which is to speak out about civility, how to speak with others who have a different opinion than you do, focusing on issues, again, like you said earlier, focus on issues that we can share about, or things that bind us together. And also, to your point too, which is finding that level of impact. That is so important. There's so many different ways. There's countless ways to serve for the public, and it would be a shame to not share, or at least motivate people to explore their level of public service with their strengths, because everyone's got different strengths. And it's important for our system, in our country to motivate people and tell them, saying, you have a place in our society to contribute. And by expanding those opportunities, by talking to people and just listening, that already is such a big deal for me. And I am so excited to continue my public speaking and to just listen to others and to help anyone out there who wants to look for a source of faith in our system and for ways for us to come together.
So, again, we're not going to get political,
Sure.
but I would love to hear a little bit more specifically about the experience that you had on January 6th and how that kind of ignited your motivation even more to kind of bring people together and have them listen to one another.
Sure. Well, I had interned on Capitol Hill, if you want, quote unquote, normal times. This was summer 2019. I used to give tours of the beautiful Capitol building for families, for children, and to see the scenes on January 6th, such a contrast to my first time on the Hill. It really shocked me, obviously, and it made me very, very sad, because I was deeply, deeply disturbed, not just by the scenes, but really by a lot of what had happened to lead up to that day. And as a young intern, you're kind of you're on the lower end of the system, so to speak, in the legislature, but you get to be the eyes and ears, and you get to soak in. And for me, as an intern, and as someone who's always curious about events in our system, it's always good to soak knowledge and not to always feel like, okay, I have to solve the national debt or something. It's all about soaking in the knowledge, making those connections. And that's exactly what I did after that event, which was not only just taking it in, as difficult as it was, but I've told my parents, I told my family, I said, I'm still motivated. I still want to do that. I still want to get into public service. This is not going to deter me. It has not deterred countless people in Washington and across the nation for people to enter public service. And the important thing is to learn from that. And for me, I share that story about how I was in lockdown. There was obviously the bomb threat that was out there, to the kind of running around and people not knowing what's going on, including myself, because you only know what you know in that kind of scenario. But I hope that regardless of what people's beliefs are, and I want to make this as non-political as possible, regardless of one's political beliefs, I hope that we take this lesson, we understand how priceless our institutions are, how important it is for all of us to engage civilly and to not let these particular events not only not happen again, but also to find ways where we can look out for each other and to do the simple things that can help us get there, whether it's grabbing coffee with someone or going to a sports game. These are the simple tasks that every day people can do. And I want to just bring out that message and say, it was a terrible day. I still have these really horrible memories about it, even to this day. It's sometimes hard. It's often hard to talk about it, but I think it's important. And if I didn't speak out, perhaps it would not be as big of a calling, a noble calling of public service as I might have anticipated to be. But I wanted to say something about it and help others in the process.
Great. Well, it is very important work that you're doing. And so when you speak, what are some of the topics that because I heard you talking about listening to people too, but what kind of strategies are you sharing, or when you speak, what are some of the topics?
Sure. Well, first of all, I talk a lot about some of the just the basic civics in our country. So I sometimes on my podcast or on my interviews, I discuss a little bit about Congress. Congress is, we often talk about the White House, which is also very, very important, but I also talk about Congress too, because it can be a very, very much misunderstood institution. I try to just point out the facts about it, point out how Congress works or how legislation can be passed through. Maybe some notable members of Congress in the past whom no one may have ever heard of before, maybe are largely forgotten, but maybe have a message for people in this day and age so that people can learn from their successes and failures. This is all part of learning about history and learning about civics too. I try to combine the two to not only add the practicality to it, but also bring out the fun, because there's really, really fascinating stories. I mentioned earlier about how I used to give tours of the Capitol as an intern. I love those times when I would point to them a beautiful painting or sculpture of some kind and tell them the story of that individual or that scene. And by taking those experiences from the Capitol Rotunda, bring them into a virtual atmosphere through podcasting and interviews, it's really become a wonderful medium for people to enjoy the basic civics foundations of our nation, but also to get that a little bit of entertainment to start their week. I love also just, again, listening to people's stories through my interviews. When I interview people, there's people who have served their communities in so many different ways, and for them to come onto the show and to reflect on how their work relates to the fabric of our nation, as well as the progress that our nation has made since the founding. These all come together into the fabric of our nation's founding, as well as where we can go as the United States of America.
Well, I love your enthusiasm and sense of hope that you're bringing. So tell me, what is the biggest internal or external challenge that you've had to overcome so far? And how did you overcome it?
Absolutely. Well, I think the biggest internal challenge I faced was that when I was younger, I always tried to please everybody. And it sounds maybe a little bit cliche for people, but it's true. Oftentimes we might be so convinced in our opinions that we think every single person has to agree with us, or at least has to share our ideas. As much as we can, love our opinions and value our values, it's not the reality that everyone's going to agree with you. I always recently referred someone to a story of the father, the son, and the donkey. It's a fable from the old times, but basically the moral of the story is one can never please everybody. And when I was younger, I used to think that I could persuade almost every single person I met. But that decreased my confidence. And what happened was that I was always let down. I always felt like, oh my goodness, maybe what I'm saying is not right. But by taking a step back, realizing that people, once again, come from all different backgrounds and have different experiences, the best way to go about it to overcome this challenge is to not only be true to oneself and one's principles, but to also be realistic about the world in which I live in. And that's in the world that it's not all about everyone who agrees with Sherman Tylawsky. It's a world where, as you pointed out earlier, it's a very complex world. And I think for me to just take a step back and realize that humility is a great virtue, and that the important thing is to focus on what you can control and not focus too much on what others think. That has been a very, very big motivator for me. And it's a big internal challenge. It took me a long, long time to figure out, but I do think in part because of my time working in public service and my education in public service, national security, it really has taught me a lot about finding confidence, retaining humility, and being true to one's principles, but also recognizing that living in a realistic world is the best way to realize one's impact.
That is such a good sense of self-awareness and so important. That's going to be really helpful to a lot of people because, I talked a little bit earlier about advocacy and really picking the level where we can make an impact. And I think a lot of people struggle with that people pleasing aspect and taking it on to feel like, whether it's you feel like you need approval or validation before you even start something, or along the way, spending time and energy on people who will likely never see from your same perspective. And at some point that becomes such a waste of energy. And it's okay to move forward with making your impact without everyone understanding. They're not in your shoes. They don't have your same perspective. And, we don't have to take that part on. As long as we have that good, strong foundation where we understand our intentions, we're specific about our goals, and aren't letting our feelings and emotions drive, we don't need to. Yeah, we don't need to listen to others who would say, don't do what you're going to do. That's awesome. That's going to be really helpful to a lot of people. So with this mission that you're on, I'm sure that there are trying times and that it requires tenacity. And so how do you stay motivated and tenacious when you're up against tough things?
Absolutely. Well, this is a really great question and something that has been a part of my time doing public speaking. One thing, the first important thing is to learn all the ways that one can make a positive impact and utilizing your strengths to find that niche or find that level. We touched upon this a little bit earlier, but I want to emphasize this point again because oftentimes when we encounter a very tough time or something, we might feel overwhelmed. We might start doubting ourselves, and we might not be so motivated or as motivated as we want to. But when we start realizing our level of impact and we start put that into perspective, that really helps a lot too. But more importantly, I think it leads to something that I've also been touching upon a lot too, which is that it's important to take breaks as well from the core parts of your career. And when I say that, I mean, literally taking breaks, right? So whether it's, going out and shooting some hoops at the basketball court, or going to a sports game, going to a party, doing something that breaks some of that repetitiveness, or maybe something that's challenging, just taking that step back and mentally recharging. I found that very, very useful in my life. With politics, it can be so huge in people's lives, and it's important, but it's not everything in our lives. And that's something I try to emphasize too, which is despite all the negativity and all the discussions that can be going on, having that balance in one's life and realizing that by letting work overwhelm you, it doesn't help at all. And so by taking that step back, taking that break every now and then, that kind of just says, all right, taking a break, and then once I'm done with this activity, I'll be right back into it. I'll be right back in the action. And that's that kind of recharge, mental recharge. If only that was more of the case in this day and age, I think a lot of things could be solved a little bit better. But that's kind of something that I found was very, very huge when it comes to dealing with something challenging, is taking that step back and finding that extra boost when you come back to that activity or you come back to that challenge. And more often than not, it works out really, really well.
Yeah, I like that. And you're so right. That is very important, that rejuvenation time. We can become depleted. And when we're depleted, it's harder to be objective and have good assertive communication, which is active listening and speaking. And, emotions can rise higher, and, we're just not as good at anything when we are depleted.
Telling
And
me.
in this instant gratification world, people have such a hard time, or people feel guilty if they take, downtime. And a lot of times I ask clients to think about, call it a cocoon phase. Don't call it rejuvenation. I mean, there's tons of stuff happening in that cocoon. It looks quiet, but there's a lot happening. So if that's what you got to call it that, because it's an important part of productivity, even though it doesn't feel like it in the moment. So, final question. What words of wisdom do you have for others who want to make their own impact in the world?
Well, if I could boil it down to one sentence, which is to be ambitious, but have humility. And it's important to have these two things, because that ambition, right, it's that drive. We talk about motivation to live a life of impact. This drive wouldn't exist if we didn't have it within ourselves. And so to be ambitious, to go for something higher, it's risky, but I always say positive change wouldn't happen if there weren't any risks. Someone or some group of people had to take risks in order to make a positive change. And so I definitely have that ambition, but the humility part, something that I mentioned a little earlier, is also really important too. We live in such a complex world, and my time, whether it's working for Congress or doing something there, you're faced always with the bureaucracy, which is there's a lot of people involved. And I think when instead of waltzing into whatever area, whether it's politics or another area of one's life, instead of waltzing in and thinking that you're going to change everything overnight, or that you're going to solve this problem with the wave of a magic wand, instead focus on the things that you can do every single day. Write out a plan for that day to say, okay, these are the kinds of things I'm going to do, or find ways to interact with people and say, well, how can I work with you, or how can I get to better know you? By taking these little steps, realizing that change is not just about one person, it's about a collective of people who have that ambition and humility, and that faith to make positive change. It makes us think about our lives a little bit differently and in a more positive manner, so that we don't feel overwhelmed, right? Or we don't feel like we have to solve every single issue right away. Let's think about the long term, think about our sustainability in our lives. And by doing these things, by remaining ambitious, but also keeping that humility, we'll be able to initiate a lot of change. I would also say one last thing is, and again, going back to my point earlier, definitely find that niche or find that area of impact that you think you can have the best chance of maximizing when it comes to your life, whether it's maximizing your strengths, finding those reasons for why you want to make an impact. Those things are going to be very, very critical, and it really feeds back into that ambition and that humility that we can all strive to have more of.
Yeah, so important. Sometimes I think we can get so hyper focused on the end goal, we forget. And I find myself talking to clients about this a lot. We can get hyper focused on that and forget to add in that relationship piece to your definition of success. It's not drive at all cost. And particularly in this time too, depending on where you're getting information or how, we have very different perspectives. And so if someone has a different perspective, we have to have patience and maybe even empathy.
Exactly.
Because it doesn't do us any good to fight or push our view. It really is about connecting first, valuing that person as a human. Again, we have that common ground if we could focus there. And these conversations don't happen well on social media.
No, they don't. And my personal experience is not. No,
not at all. Yes. Please don't. Don't spend any time engaging there on these topics. Too black and white. no negotiation, no focus on common ground, only the differences, and really kind of igniting those differences.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much. I will be interested to see on kind of the progress that you make. And now, are you actually running, or this is just a future goal?
It's a future goal, but I can tell you that it's going to happen. So I don't know exactly when. Maybe I'll keep you posted, or maybe something will be out there, making an announcement or whatever. But I'm still intended on achieving that goal in the future.
Okay. And whereabout would you possibly be running?
Well,
I
can definitely say somewhere in the western part of the U.S. I'm originally from California, but I have connections with California, Nevada, but also have connections with Virginia and Florida. So there's a ton of amazing, interesting states that can be great places for public service. I don't think there's really just one place to do public service. There's so many amazing parts of this country where people can do public service, and we'll see how things go. But I would say those 4 states in particular would be the closest to my heart at this time.
Interesting. So, I thought maybe a first for me was going to be able to say, you heard it first here, folks. So with some official announcement, but okay. Well, so you definitely need to keep me posted, both on, this kind of grassroots effort that you have right now to really listen and bring people together and diminish that divide. Thank you for that. So I will be curious to see and want updates from you for sure. And then, if you end up running, I would love to learn about that as well. And if you want to connect further with Sherman Tylawsky, you can find his podcast at shermantylawsky.com. Let me spell that for you. ShermanTylawsky.com. And as always, you'll be able to find his links on the show notes for today. And you can find those by going to defeatthedrama.com, click on the podcast tab, and go to episode 235. And while we're talking about impact, my Impact Academy has launched. And so this is a place for impact makers to go to find a zillion resources and building on everything from mindset and leading and advocacy and getting volunteers, getting the best out of volunteers. So there are videos and audios and PDF downloads and monthly time in groups with me on strategy and coaching and just more information and resources adding constantly. So if you'd like to check it out, I invite you to go to myimpactacademy.com/join, and you will find just a ton there. And I really look forward to locking arms with you there. So thanks for listening. Thanks for the impact that you're making in this world. Get out there and make your bigger, bolder impact. And again, Sherman, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, for having me. I had a wonderful time, and thank you all for what you do.
Awesome.